I always knew the moment someone grabbed my wrist without permission, their whole life would pour into my skin like hot water. Every secret, every sin, every ugly thing they buried, that's my gift, or my curse, depending on the day. My name is Noh Sunwoo. I'm 23 years old. I sell barbecue skewers on the side of a road in Mapo-gu, Seoul, and I am, allegedly, the sole heir to Choi Industries, one of the largest privately held conglomerates in South Korea. I say allegedly because my grandfather hasn't confirmed it publicly yet. I say yet because that conversation is coming, and when it does, I want to already know exactly who in my life was real and who was performing. Starting with my pack. The cart smelled like charcoal and sesame oil, and the particular kind of dignity that comes from choosing to be underestimated. I had set up at my usual corner near Hapjeong Station at 5:30 in the morning. The sky still that bruised shade of purple that Seoul gets in early spring, the Han River a dark ribbon in the distance. I like this hour. Nobody expected anything from anyone at this hour. I flipped a row of pork belly skewers, watched the fat render and sizzle, and tried not to think about the fact that my pack had a formal dinner last night, and not a single one of them had called to tell me it was happening. I found out through Jang Dawen's assistant, his assistant, who sent a group calendar invite. That did not include me. I touched the notification on my phone screen and felt nothing, because there was nothing to feel from a calendar app. But I had touched Dawen's watch 3 weeks ago when he left it on my kitchen counter, and what I felt then had been sitting in my chest like a splinter ever since. Impatience. Mild embarrassment. Something that felt uncomfortably close to shame. Not his shame about something he did, his shame about me. I filed that away and kept flipping skewers. The first customer of the morning was a university student with paint on his jacket who ordered 4 skewers and called me young, even though he was probably only 2 years younger than me. I liked him. He paid, ate standing up, and left without asking me a single personal question. The second customer was Im Kang-ho, my pack's second in command, 28 years old, jawline sharp enough to file taxes with. He walked up to my cart with his hands in the pockets of a coat that cost more than my monthly rent and looked at me the way someone looks at a stray cat that has somehow gotten into their apartment. Fond, vaguely bewildered, not quite taking it seriously. "You're really out here again," he said. "Correct," I said. "Skewer?" He wrinkled his nose at the smoke. "Sunwoo." "I'm aware. Then why?" "Kang-ho." I pointed the tongs at him. "Skewer, yes or no?" He sighed the way men sigh when they find something both charming and beneath them. He took a skewer. He ate it standing up like the university student had, except with considerably more self-consciousness, glancing around to make sure nobody he knew was watching. I watched him do it and kept my expression pleasant and easy. Inside, I was noting everything. I had touched his hand once 2 months ago when he passed me a coffee cup during a pack gathering at Seo Jingo's apartment. What I felt was not warmth. What I felt was a complicated layered thing that I had spent a long time trying to name accurately. Tolerance. Protectiveness with conditions attached. And underneath both of those, quiet, steady, barely examined, the belief that I was temporary, that I was a phase the pack was going through before they figured out what they actually wanted. I smiled at him now and handed him a napkin. "Tell Jinyo," I said. "Good morning," I said. Something flickered across his face. "You should tell him yourself. I would have, at dinner last night, if I'd been invited." The silence that followed was the specific kind that confirms everything you already knew. Kang-ho had the decency to look away first. He handed me exact change, which he never did. He always told me to keep it and walked back toward the station without another word. I turned back to my grill, noted. By 7 in the morning, I had served 11 customers and mentally cataloged the following. 1. My pack had been holding gatherings without me for at least 3 weeks based on what I could piece together from secondhand information and the faint collective discomfort that radiated off Kang-ho's shoulders when I mentioned it. 2. Im Kang-ho believed, on some level he had never examined out loud, that I did not belong. 3. He ate the skewer anyway, which meant some part of him wanted to stay close, even while another part of him kept drawing the line just far enough away that I could never quite reach it. People are interesting that way. My grandfather had told me that once. Han Ji-jeol, 71 years old, founder of Choi Industries. The man who had raised me after my parents died when I was 9 and who had, 6 months ago, sat me down in his study in Shangbuk-dong with a cup of barley tea and said, in the flat, unbothered tone he used for all significant things, "I'm leaving you everything. But first, I want you to go find out who loves you without knowing what you're worth." I had looked at him for a long time. He looked back, I asked. "Start there," he said. So I started there. The cart was a rental. The apartment I was living in was a modest 2-room in Mapo that I paid for out of a separate account my grandfather set up specifically for this exercise. My real apartment, the one in Hanam-dong with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the walk-in closet I had never once used efficiently, was sitting empty and waiting. I had told my pack I was going through something, a personal reset, that I needed to step back from pack life for a while and figure myself out. Xiojingo, the pack alpha, had looked at me with those careful dark eyes of his and said, "We'll be here when you're ready," which sounded like support, which felt, when I touched his forearm 2 days later during a conversation about nothing, like relief. Not the relief of someone who loves you and is trying to give you space. The relief of someone who was not sure what to do with you and had just been handed a graceful exit. I pulled my cart cover down against a gust of wind off the river and thought about that feeling, the exact texture of it under my fingertips, cool and smooth and deeply quietly damning. For my pack, the people who were supposed to be mine. And not one of them had shown up to my corner in Mapo-gu on a cold spring morning and said, "I need to know you're okay." Kang-ho had come. But Kang-ho came for the skewers. I turned the heat up on the grill and smiled to myself, small and private and a little dangerous. Fine. Let them think I was nothing. I had psychometry and patience and a grandfather with 70 billion won and a very particular sense of justice. I could wait. They had no idea what was coming, and honestly, neither did I, not fully. Because what my hands told me was only ever the truth people carried without knowing it. What they'd do with that truth once the ground shifted beneath them. That part I still had to see for myself. The wind off the hunt picked up again, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust and the distant, greasy perfume of someone else's food cart 2 blocks over. I adjusted the heat on the grill and started threading the next round of skewers, pork and green onion alternating in the way that took exactly 4 seconds per stick if your hands knew what they were doing. Mine did. I had learned this particular skill on purpose, the same way I had learned to look unbothered, the same way I had learned to smile at people who were quietly deciding I was not worth their full attention. Practice. Repetition. The particular discipline of someone who has decided that being underestimated is a strategy and not a wound. A group of office workers passed without stopping. A delivery rider slowed, looked at my sign, and kept going. Then the footsteps I recognized before I even looked up, that specific unhurried cadence that belonged to only one person in my life, the kind of walk that said I own this sidewalk without ever needing to announce it out loud. Seo Jingyo, Pack Alpha, 29 years old. The kind of man who made a room rearrange itself around him without trying. He was in a light gray crewneck and dark slacks. Hair slightly pushed back, hands free, no coffee, which meant he had come here directly and not on his way to somewhere else. I noted that. I noted everything about Jingo because Jingo was the one I had the least data on, and that bothered me more than I liked to admit. I had only touched him once in a way that counted, a brush of fingers when he handed me a packed document I needed to sign 3 months ago, and what I felt had been so layered and compressed it was like pressing my hand against a Lactae safe. Warmth on the outside. Something much heavier underneath. Something that had been sitting there a long time and had grown very still, the way things go still when they have given up on being moved. I did not know what that meant yet, and not knowing things made me itchy. "You're here early," I said without looking up from the grill. So are you," he said. "I live here, metaphorically speaking." He stopped at the cart and stood the way he always stood, weight back slightly, arms loose, like he was giving you the option to approach without pushing. It was a very deliberate posture. I had studied it. "Kangho said he saw you this morning." Kangho also ate 3 skewers and pretended he wasn't enjoying them. We all have our performances. The corner of Jinyo's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "Are you performing right now?" I looked up at him then. Full eye contact, the kind I knew made people uncomfortable, because I held it about 4 seconds longer than was polite. "I'm grilling pork belly at 7 in the morning, Jingo. This is as authentic as I get." He was quiet for a moment. The grill popped and hissed between us. A bus groaned past on the main road. He looked at the cart, then at me, then at the row of skewers with the focused attention of someone doing math they hadn't expected to need. "You didn't come to dinner last night." There it was. I kept my face easy. "I wasn't invited." "You're always invited, your pack." "Interesting." The calendar invite that went to every member except me suggests otherwise, but I appreciate the clarification. I handed him a skewer without asking. He took it, which told me he was trying, which told me he felt something. I just did not know yet if what he felt was guilt or management. There was a difference, a significant one. Guilt meant he cared about the wrong. Management meant he cared about the optics of it. My psychometry could not read intention through food. Unfortunately, he ate the skewer slowly, looking out at the street rather than at me. It was an oversight. "Sure, Sunwoo. Jingo, I'm serious. So am I skewer?" I held one out. He already had one. He looked at it anyway. I put it back. "Here's the thing about oversights," I said. "Conversational, pleasant. The tone I used when I was saying something with teeth while smiling. They happen once, maybe twice if everyone's genuinely busy. 3 weeks of consistent oversights starts to look less like forgetting and more like a decision someone made and nobody wanted to say out loud. The silence after that had weight. He turned back from the street and looked at me, and for just a moment, something moved behind his eyes that was not the careful, controlled thing he usually showed me. Something that looked, startlingly, like pain. Not the pain of being caught, the other kind, the kind you carry for yourself. It was there for 2 seconds and then it was gone, packed back behind the composure like he had never let it slip. I filed that away too. We should talk, he said. We are talking, properly. At the apartment. Which apartment? Yours? Mine? The one where packed dinners happen that I don't get invited to. He exhaled slowly through his nose. You're not going to make this easy, Jingyo. I set the tongs down, leaned one arm on the cart, and looked at him with complete cheerful honesty. I sell barbecue on a public street. Nothing about my life right now is easy. Why would I make yours the exception? He stared at me for a long moment, then unexpectedly he laughed, a real one, short and low, the kind that escapes before a person decides whether they meant to let it. It changed his face completely. Younger and unguarded and just slightly undone, I had not heard him laugh like that before. I stored the sound somewhere I could not name and did not examine too closely. Saturday, he said. Packed dinner. I'll send the invite myself. Bold of you to assume I'm free Saturday. Are you? I picked the tongs back up. I'll check my schedule. He was almost smiling again when he turned to leave, hands back in his pockets, that unhurried walk already reassembling itself into something intentional. He paused after 3 steps without turning around. The skewer was good. They always are, I said to his back. I watched him walk away and let myself feel the thing I had been holding at a careful distance since he arrived because I was disciplined, not made of stone. And C.O. Genio laughing unexpectedly at my bad attitude was not something I had accounted for in my calculations. I pressed my palm flat against the metal surface of the cart, cool and solid and grounding. He had come here himself, on no particular occasion, with no particular excuse. He had stood at my cart and let me be sharp with him and not once tried to pull rank. His hands had been empty when he arrived. No coffee, no phone, no deflection. That meant something. I just did not know yet if it meant something good. 2 more alphas to account for this morning, because I knew my pack's schedules better than they knew mine, and unless Bai Ryunho had changed his running route, he would pass this corner in approximately 11 minutes. He always ran the Han River path on weekday mornings and cut back through Mapo-gu on his return. And where Ryunho went in the mornings, Choi Sung-won usually followed, because Sung-won was incapable of letting anyone in his vicinity be active without feeling personally challenged by it. I had touched Ryunho's running jacket once when he left it on my couch, and what I felt had been clean and fast and bright. Loyalty sitting on the surface like something he was not even trying to hide. But underneath that brightness, a fracture, thin as a paper cut but deep, something that had happened and not healed right. I did not know what caused it. I needed more contact to be sure. Sungwon I had not read properly yet. Every time I reached for him intentionally he moved, not because he knew, but because he was naturally, constitutionally incapable of sitting still. Reading Sungwon was like trying to psychometrize a hummingbird. I heard the footsteps before I saw him, that specific rhythm of someone who runs like they are competing against a personal record nobody else knows about. Bae Ryunho came around the corner in a dark blue tracksuit, earphones in, pace high, and then his eyes found my cart and he stopped so suddenly he nearly tripped over his own feet. Sunwoo? He pulled one earphone out, breathing hard, sweat at his temple. 27 years old, the tallest of the 4, the one who smiled the most easily and meant it the least often, though not in a cruel way. More in the way of someone who had learned early that a smile was the fastest way to keep people comfortable and had never unlearned it. You're here? Where else would I be? I don't know, not outside at 7 in the morning selling meat to strangers. And yet here we both are. I held up a skewer. He looked at it, looked at me, then jogged the remaining distance to the cart with the resigned energy of a man who had already lost an argument he had not started yet. I watched him pull out both earphones now, wrapping the cord around his phone with the focused attention people give small tasks when they are buying themselves a second to think. Ryunho was like that, always managing the moment slightly, always giving himself a half-beat of buffer between feeling something and showing it. I found it interesting. Most people either felt too loudly or not at all. Ryunho felt precisely and then edited. He took the skewer I was still holding out and bit into it standing up, and his expression did the thing it always did when something was better than he expected, a small involuntary softening around the eyes that he immediately tried to neutralize. Okay, he said. That's genuinely good. I know. You're not even a little humble about it. Humility is for people who aren't sure, I'm sure. I started threading the next row. How's the pack? He chewed, looked out at the street. Fine, fine, I repeated. Comprehensive, detailed, really paints a picture. He cut me a sideways look that was half amused and half something more careful. Why are you asking me like that? Like what? Like you already know the answer and you're checking if I'll lie. I paused for exactly 1 second, then went back to threading skewers with the same easy rhythm. Runho, I ask about the pack the same way every morning. You're projecting. He was quiet for a moment, and I could feel him deciding, the way I could always feel people deciding things even without touching them. The small shift in posture, the way the breathing changes when someone is choosing between honesty and comfort. He chose comfort. He always chose comfort first. Jinjo's been stressed, he said finally. Pack business, territory stuff. Nothing that affects you. Nothing that affects you. I let that phrase settle into my chest like a stone dropping into still water. Noted the ripples. Kept my face entirely neutral. Sure, I said. Sunwoo. Ryun-ho. I'm not trying to exclude you. I didn't say you were. I handed him a second skewer before he asked. He took it, which told me he felt guilty. Because Ryun-ho only accepted things freely when something in him was trying to compensate. I'm just a guy who sells barbecue. Pack business is pack business. He frowned at that, a real one, not the polished kind. Don't do that. Do what? The thing where you act like you don't care by caring too precisely. I looked at him then, fully, and let myself be a little honest, because Ryunho was the one who would sit with it rather than deflect. You went to dinner last night without me. His jaw tightened. That wasn't my call. Silence. Not the guilty kind this time. The kind that means the answer is complicated and nobody has decided yet how to say it out loud. I watched him work through it, watched him open his mouth and close it once, and then a sound behind me pulled both our attention before he could find the words. Footsteps? Fast and uneven, the gait of someone who moves through the world like punctuation, all energy and no particular destination. Choi Sung-won arrived at my cart the way he arrived everywhere, suddenly and with commitment, like he had been launched from somewhere nearby. 27 years old, the youngest alpha in the pack, the one with the quick hands and the quicker mouth and the habit of standing just slightly too close to people he liked. He was in an oversized cream hoodie and gray sweatpants, and he was holding a convenience store coffee cup in each hand, which meant he had planned to find Ryunho and had bought the second one before locating him. He stopped when he saw me, and his whole face broke open into the most genuinely delighted expression I had seen on any of the four of them in weeks. Sunwoo. He said my name like it was a good surprise and not a scheduled occurrence. You're here. Why are you here? I love that you're here. I'm always here. I have a cart. It has a sign. The sign has my hours. I know, but I always forget, and then I'm always happy when I remember. He handed one of the coffees to Ryunho without looking at him, eyes still on me, and then looked at the grill with open, uncomplicated hunger. Can I have 3? You can have 2. You had street food for dinner based on the sauce stain on the left cuff of that hoodie, and your stomach will complain at 3 before 9 in the morning. He looked at his cuff. Look back at me. How do you do that? Observation, basic skill. Anyone can learn it. I loaded 2 skewers into a paper sleeve and handed them over. He took them with both hands and the reverence of someone receiving something sacred. I watched him eat and felt the familiar, complicated thing I always felt around Sungwon, which was that he was the easiest of the 4 to be near and somehow the hardest to read because his energy was so consistently warm and open that it made it difficult to locate the shape of what was underneath it. He was not performing warmth, that was just him. But warmth was not the same as depth, and I needed depth to understand what I was actually dealing with. I had touched his hoodie string once when it brushed my hand during a close conversation. Just the cord, cheap polyester, and what I got was a flash of something so fast I almost missed it. Protectiveness, immediate and reflexive, and very specifically directed. Not at the pack in general, at someone in particular. I had not been able to identify who. That thread, pun intended, was still loose. You both look guilty, I said pleasantly, looking between Sungwon and Ryunho. Sungwon pointed at himself with a skewer. Me? I don't feel guilty. You're eating very enthusiastically for someone with nothing on his conscience. I eat enthusiastically always. It's called having a healthy relationship with food. It's called deflection with extra seasoning. I topped up the grill and watched Ryunho finish his second skewer in silence, that frown still sitting between his brows. The one he got when something was bothering him that he had not resolved yet. Ryunho. You were about to say something before Sungwon launched himself at us. Ryunho looked at Sungwon, Sungwon looked at Ryunho. Something passed between them, fast and wordless, The kind of communication that only existed between people who had been in each other's space long enough to have a whole language of glances. I watched it happen and felt the familiar cold clarity that came when my psychometry could not reach, but my eyes could see just fine. They knew something, both of them, and they had just agreed in the span of a single look not to say it. Nothing, Ryun-ho said. I forgot. Uh-huh. I wiped down the side of the cart, slow and unbothered. You know what I like about this job? The fresh air? Sungwon offered. People are honest when they think no one important is watching. I smiled at him, sweet and uncomplicated on the surface. Street vendor is basically invisible. You'd be amazed what people say in front of me. Sungwon's chewing slowed just slightly. Ryun-ho had gone very still in the way he did when something landed that he had not expected. I let the silence breathe for a moment, comfortable in it the way I was always comfortable in silences that were doing work. Then Sungwon recovered first, because he always recovered first. It was one of his most useful qualities. Are you saying we say things in front of you? I'm saying everyone does. I looked at him mildly. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just noting the phenomenon. You're terrifying, he said. But he said it with warmth, the way you say something terrifying about a person you find compelling, not threatening. I stored that too. A new customer arrived, a middle-aged man in a delivery uniform who ordered 5 skewers and paid in exact coins and did not make eye contact once. And I gave him my full attention, because that was the job, and the job was real regardless of everything else happening around it. By the time I looked back, Sungwon had finished both his skewers and Ryun-ho had taken 2 steps back with the physical language of someone preparing to leave. Saturday dinner, Ryun-ho said. Jingo said he was going to call you. He came in person, actually. Something moved across Ryun-ho's face at that. Surprise and something heavier underneath it, and I caught it clearly before he reassembled. He had not known Gino was coming here, which meant Gino had not told them, which meant the Pack Alpha had made a decision this morning that was not coordinated with the others. That was new information. Small, but significant, the kind of detail that changed the shape of a picture you thought you understood. Good, Ryun-ho said, and the word came out slightly uneven, like he had put it together quickly. Then we'll see you Saturday. Maybe, I said, Sunwoo. His voice had something in it now, not command. Ryun-ho was not the commanding type, but something closer to earnestness, the kind that cost him something to show. I know things have been off. I know you know they've been off. Just. He paused, jaw working. Give it until Saturday, okay? I looked at him for a long moment, Bae Ryun-ho, with his careful smiles and his pre-edited feelings and his loyalty that sat bright and fractured at the same time. Choi Sungwon, standing slightly behind him now with both paper sleeves crumpled in one hand and that warm, watchful energy that was never as uncomplicated as it looked. I'll think about it, I said. Sungwon pointed at me as they turned to leave. That means yes from him. That means I'll think about it, I said to his retreating back. Same thing, he called without turning around. I watched them go, Sungwon matching Ryun-ho's stride easily, their shoulders close but not touching. The comfortable proximity of people who had shared space long enough to stop noticing it. The morning light was stronger now, that flat early gold that Seoul does in spring, catching the dust on the street and turning it briefly beautiful. I turned back to my grill. 4 alphas, 1 pack. And somewhere underneath the careful management and the guilty silences and Gino's laughter that had escaped before he meant it, there was something I had not fully mapped yet. Something that had been decided about me without me in the room. I could feel the outline of it the way you feel a bruise before you can see it. Pressure where there should not be any, an absence where something solid was supposed to be. My grandfather had told me to find out who loved me without knowing my worth. What he had not told me was what to do with the answer, if it turned out to be more complicated than either yes or no. I threaded another skewer. The grill hissed. The city moved around me with its usual indifferent noise. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I wiped my hand on the cloth tucked into my apron and answered, Sunwoo C. The voice was formal, measured, carrying the particular weight of someone who delivered serious information for a living. This is Attorney Woo Jae-hak. I'm calling on behalf of your grandfather, Han Jishiol. He'd like to see you at the Songbuk-dong residence today. At your earliest convenience. A pause. He said to tell you the clock has started. I went very still. The clock has started. That was the phrase we agreed on. 6 months ago in the study over barley tea. That phrase meant one thing. It meant my grandfather had set a date, the board announcement, the inheritance transfer. The moment Choi Industries went formally and publicly into my name, that was no longer hypothetical. It was scheduled. I looked down the street in the direction Gino had walked, then the direction Ryun-ho and Sungwon had gone. Saturday dinner, 4 alphas, 1 table, and a clock that had just started ticking. I stood with the phone still warm against my ear long after Attorney Wu had said goodbye, and the line had gone quiet, and I did not move for a full 10 seconds, which for me was basically an eternity. The grill popped beside me. A pigeon landed on the edge of the cart, looked at me with the blank confidence of something that had never once doubted its right to exist anywhere. It chose and then left. I related to that pigeon more than I wanted to admit. I tucked the phone back into my apron pocket and took a slow breath. The clock has started meant I had days, not weeks. It meant my grandfather's health, which had been quietly declining since winter, in the way old men's health declines when they have finished all their major business and are simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up, had reached a point where waiting was no longer practical. It meant the board of Choi Industries was already being notified. It meant that somewhere in Seoul right now, in glass offices and private cars and over lunch meetings I was not part of, people who had never once thought about Noh Sunwoo were about to start thinking about Noh Sunwoo very seriously. And my pack still thought I sold pork belly for a living. I started breaking down the cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 6 months, folding the cover, securing the grill lid, locking the wheels. A woman passing with a stroller gave me a sympathetic look, the kind people gave street vendors packing up early, assuming struggle. I gave her my most serene smile. She looked slightly unnerved and walked faster. Reasonable response. The Songbuk-dong house was 40 minutes from Mapo-gu by subway, less by car. And I did not have a car at this address because the whole point of this address was that I was a person who took the subway. I took the subway. I sat in the corner seat of the second car with my cart keys in my pocket and my apron still on because I had forgotten to take it off and only noticed when the man sitting across from me stared at it for 3 stops in a row. I took it off. He looked away. I looked out the window at the dark tunnel walls rushing past and thought about what my grandfather had looked like the last time I visited, smaller than I remembered, the sharp edges of him softened by age in a way that made something behind my sternum hurt every single time. He had built Choi Industries from a single logistics contract in 1981. He had expanded it into construction, real estate, private equity, and infrastructure over 4 decades of decisions that people who studied business still argued about in lecture halls. He had done most of it alone after my grandmother died, and he had raised me alone after my parents died. And he had done both those things with the same flat, unbothered competence he brought to everything, as if love were simply another form of logistics. And he was very good at logistics. I loved him in the specific, complicated way you love someone who taught you to be strong, partly by refusing to let you be weak in front of him. And I was terrified, in a way I did not let myself examine too directly, of a world that did not have him in it. The subway doors opened at Hanzong University Station, and I climbed the steps into the Songbuk-dong Air, which was different from Mapo Air, quieter and older, the streets narrower and lined with the kind of trees that had been there long enough to have opinions. I walked the familiar route to the house with my hands in my pockets and my mind doing the thing it did under pressure, organizing, categorizing, building a clean structure out of complicated materials. Facts, the announcement was coming. The timeline was now measured in days. My pack did not know. The test was not finished. I did not have enough data on all 4 of them yet. Jino's locked safe feeling, Kang-ho's conditional protectiveness, Ryun-ho's fractured loyalty, Sungwon's unidentified, specifically directed protectiveness. None of it was complete. None of it was enough to act on, which meant the next few days were the most important of the entire 6 months. The gate to the house was open, which meant my grandfather had told the staff to expect me. I walked through the courtyard, past the old persimmon tree that had been dropping fruit on that same patch of stone for 30 years, and into the main room where Attorney Wu was already seated at the low table with a folder in front of him, and the expression of a man who had delivered significant news enough times that he had developed a specific neutral face for it. My grandfather was in his chair by the window. He looked up when I came in, and his eyes were exactly as sharp as they had always been, whatever the rest of him was doing. "You're still wearing charcoal on your left sleeve," he said. "Hello to you too, grandfather. Sit down." I sat. Attorney Wu opened the folder. My grandfather looked at me with the steady, measuring look I had grown up under, the one that never felt unkind even when it was assessing. "The board announcement is in 4 days," he said. "Thursday morning. Private session first, public statement by afternoon. Your name goes on everything by end of business. 4 days." I kept my face even. "Okay. How is the test going?" It was not a question, the way he said it. It was an opening. I looked at my hands, still faintly smelling of sesame oil and smoke, and considered how to answer honestly, without sounding like someone who had let himself get more emotionally involved than was strictly scientific. "Incomplete," I said. I need more contact, more time. You have 4 days, I'm aware. He was quiet for a moment, looking at me with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite pride, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Did any of them show up without a reason? I thought of Gino walking up to my cart with empty hands and no excuse. One, I said. My grandfather nodded slowly. Like that meant something specific to him. Maybe it did. He had been reading people since before I was born. And the others? Still collecting data. He almost smiled. You sound like me. I'll take that as a compliment. It was. He closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, the way he did when he was tired but refused to say so. 4 days, Sunwoo. Find out what you need to know. Because once Thursday comes, everything changes, and you will not get another chance to see them clearly. I looked at the persimmon tree through the window, bare-branched and patient in the spring light. 4 days to finish what I started. 4 alphas who still thought I was nobody. And one very specific Saturday dinner that was suddenly a great deal more interesting than it had been this morning. I left the Songbuk-dong house with a copy of the announcement schedule tucked into my jacket pocket and the particular kind of focus that settles over me when a deadline stops being abstract and becomes a number I can count on my fingers. 4 days. I walked back through the courtyard, past the persimmon tree, through the gate, and stood on the quiet Songbuk-dong street for a moment, with the afternoon light pressing warm against my face. Then I took out my phone and sent a single message to Seo Jinyo. Saturday works. What time? His reply came in 40 seconds, which was fast enough to be telling. 7. My place. I'll cook. I stared at that for a moment. Gino cooking meant Gino was making an effort, because Gino did not cook casually. He cooked the way he did everything deliberate, when something mattered enough to warrant full attention. I typed back, okay, and put the phone away before I could analyze it further, because I had 4 days and a finite amount of emotional bandwidth and I needed to allocate it carefully. The subway back to Mapo was busier now, the mid-morning crowd thickening with people who moved through the city with the comfortable certainty of people who belonged exactly where they were. I stood holding the overhead rail and let the motion of the car do the thinking for me. That particular dissociation of transit, where your body is going somewhere and your mind is free to go somewhere else entirely. I thought about what I actually knew. Gino, locked and layered, who had come to my cart with empty hands and let me be sharp with him and laughed when he did not mean to. Kang-ho, tolerant and conditional, who ate my skewers while checking if anyone important was watching. Ryun-ho, bright and fractured, loyal in the way of someone whose loyalty had been tested before and had not come through it completely whole. Sung-won, warm and specifically protective of someone, fast-moving and hard to pin, the one data point I still could not fully place. 4 men. 4 incomplete reads, 4 days. I got off one stop early and walked the rest of the way back to Mapo on purpose, because walking helped me think and thinking was currently my primary occupation. The street was doing its usual afternoon thing, fruit vendors calling prices, a group of middle school kids spilling out of a convenience store with ice cream already melting down their hands, the smell of fried chicken beginning its daily assault on the neighborhood air. I passed my cart, still locked and folded at its corner spot, and did not stop. I stopped instead at the small park 1 block over, the one with the 3 benches and the ginkgo tree that dropped its leaves in a perfect circle every autumn like it was trying to make a point. I sat on the middle bench and took the announcement schedule out of my jacket and read it again, not because the words had changed, but because reading things twice was how I made them real. Thursday, 4 days, my name on everything. And on Saturday, 2 days after that, I would sit at Gino's table and eat food he had cooked deliberately and look at the 4 men who had been managing me at a careful distance for months, and they would not know yet. They would not know that the person they had been leaving off calendar invites and discussing pack business without was already technically one of the most significant inheritances in South Korean corporate history. The thought should have been satisfying. It was a little. But underneath the satisfaction was something more complicated and less comfortable that I had been careful not to look at directly, the thing that lived in the space between what my psychometry told me and what I still, despite everything, wanted to be wrong about. Because here was what I had not told my grandfather. Here was the piece of data I had collected and set aside and kept setting aside because it did not fit cleanly into the organizing structure I was trying to build. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday evening, I had gone to Gino's apartment to return a book I had borrowed. I knocked, no one answered. I used the key I still had because no one had asked for it back, and I let myself in to leave the book on the entry table. The apartment was empty. I set the book down and my hand brushed the surface of the entry table. Dark wood, old, one of the few pieces of furniture Gino had kept from his family home in Cheongju, and what hit me through my palm was so sudden and so dense that I had to sit down on the floor of his entryway for a full minute before I could stand. Back up. It was not one feeling. It was years of feeling compressed into the grain of old wood. Every significant moment Gino had stood at table, keys in hand, arriving and leaving and arriving again. And running through all of it, threaded through every layer like a wire-carrying current, was something that had my name on it. Not my face. Psychometry did not work in images. But the specific emotional frequency of a person, the particular shape of how someone feels when they are thinking about one individual and no one else, and it had my name written all over it in a language made entirely of longing. Not management, not tolerance, not the careful, conditional regard I had been bracing for. Something that had been there a long time. Something that had been getting heavier, not lighter, the longer I spent at that cart pretending to be nobody. I had stood up off that floor, walked out of his apartment, locked the door behind me, and not touched that table again. I had filed the information in the part of my mind labeled things that require more evidence before conclusions are drawn, and I had not opened that file since. I opened it now, sitting on the middle bench under the ginkgo tree in Mapo with the announcement schedule in my hand and 4 days on the clock. If Gino had been feeling that consistently and privately for longer than I had been running this test, then one of two things was true. Either he was keeping me at a distance because of his feelings, not despite them, which was the most frustrating possible motivation for exclusion, and also I had to admit, the most human. Or there was something else underneath it that I had not read yet, something that complicated what the table had told me in a way I could not predict from where I was currently sitting. Either way, Saturday just became less about dinner and more about answers. I folded the schedule back into my pocket and stood up from the bench. A kid on a bicycle rang his bell at me from the path, and I stepped aside. Without looking up, my phone buzzed. Ryunho this time. Gino said you're coming Saturday. Good. Then, after a pause that I could tell even through text had cost him something, I'm glad. 2 words. I'm glad. From Bai Ryunho, who pre-edited everything. I typed back, don't burn the side dishes, and kept walking. I had 4 days to finish this. And for the first time since I set up that cart 6 months ago, I was not entirely sure what I was hoping to find. That thought followed me all the way back to my Mapo apartment, up the narrow stairwell that smelled like someone's dinner and old wood, through my door and into the small, deliberately ordinary space I had been living in for 6 months. 2 rooms, 1 window facing the street. A kitchen the size of a generous thought. I had furnished it minimally on purpose, the way you furnish a temporary space, except that somewhere around month 3 I had started buying things that were not strictly necessary. A decent kettle, a plant that required actual attention, a specific brand of barley tea that I liked and could have had delivered to Hanamdong in bulk, but instead bought 1 box at a time from the convenience store downstairs because buying things 1 box at a time felt like something a real person did. I was not sure when this address had stopped feeling like a set and started feeling like somewhere I actually lived. I noticed it now and filed it under things to examine when I had more time, which at this rate would be never. I showered, changed into clothes that did not smell like a grill, and sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea and the specific problem of Choi Dungwon. Of the 4, he was the only one I had not gotten a clear read on, and with 4 days left that gap was starting to feel less like an inconvenience and more like a structural weakness. I needed contact. Real contact. The kind where my psychometry had enough to work with, skin or something worn close to skin, long enough to get past the surface noise and into the actual signal. The problem with Sunwoo was that he moved constantly, talked constantly, and had the personal bubble of someone who had never once felt threatened by closeness. He was physically affectionate with everyone in the pack, shoulder touches, brief back-of-the-neck grabs, the casual overlap of people who had been sharing space for years, but it was always him initiating and always brief. And brief was not enough for me to read anything deeper than the immediate surface. I needed him to be still, which meant I needed a reason to make him stop moving. I pulled up his contact in my phone and typed, "Are you busy tonight?" His response was immediate, "Never for you." "Why?" I typed back, "Come help me with something at the cart. Bring your hands." There was a pause of about 15 seconds, which for Sunwoo was practically a philosophical crisis. "Then this sounds like work," I replied. "It is work. I'll feed you." Another pause. "Okay, but I want the pork belly ones, not the chicken." I was at the cart by 5:30. Set up and running by 5:45, the evening crowd in Mapo, different from the morning crowd, looser, hungrier in a more social way, groups of coworkers and couples and the occasional solitary person who ate street food standing up with the peaceful expression of someone having the best part of their day. Sunwoo arrived at 6, hands in pockets, that cream hoodie replaced by a dark green one, looking like someone who had absolutely no idea he was part of a controlled experiment. "What are we doing?" he said, looking at the cart. "You're helping me restock the skewer tray and hand orders to customers while I manage the grill." He blinked. "That's a real job." "Yes. Welcome to the workforce." I handed him a pair of disposable gloves. He put them on with the solemn concentration of someone suiting up for something significant. I hid my smile and turned back to the grill. For the first 20 minutes, it was genuinely chaotic because Seung-won had never worked a food service counter in his life and had strong opinions about the order in which customers should be served that did not align with the established convention of first come, first served. He argued briefly with a man in a business suit about this. The man left with his skewers, looking slightly bewildered. Seung-won looked vindicated. I said nothing because the customer had actually been rude about it, and I had been considering saying something myself. "You're not bad at this," I said, around the 40-minute mark. He looked pleased in the uncomplicated way he looked pleased about everything. "I'm good at people." "You are," I agreed. "You read them fast." "You're faster," he said without hesitation, handing a paper sleeve to a university student without looking away from me. "You always know what someone needs before they say it." "It's kind of wild, actually." I glanced at him. "Is it? I noticed it the first time I met you. Jin-yo introduced you at that packed dinner and you spent the whole night saying exactly the right thing to each person, and I kept thinking, this guy is either very intuitive or he's done a lot of homework on all of us." He paused. "Which was it?" "Both," I said honestly. He laughed, short and bright. Then he was quiet for a moment, the longest stretch of quiet I had gotten from him in months. And in that quiet, he picked up the spare skewer tray from the cart surface to pass to me, and his bare wrist, glove pushed back slightly, made contact with the back of my hand for a full 3 seconds as I reached for it. 3 seconds was enough. It came through clean and fast and absolutely nothing like what I expected. Not the bright surface warmth I always felt from him at a distance. Underneath that warmth was something tightly wound, a specific and focused anxiety that had a shape I recognized because I had felt its outline before in the hoodie string and the directional protectiveness I had clocked and not been able to place. It was directed at me, all of it. The anxiety, the protectiveness, the thing underneath both of those that was quieter and more serious, and had been sitting there long enough to have roots. He was worried about me, not in the casual way, in the way of someone who had seen something or heard something or knew something he did not know how to raise without breaking something else in the process. I set the tray down, kept my voice easy. "Seung-won." "Yeah." "Is there something you want to tell me?" The question landed softly, and he felt it anyway. I watched it move through him, that brief stillness that was so unlike him it was almost loud. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the grill. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you've been specifically worried about me for at least 3 weeks, and I'd rather hear it from you directly than read it off your furniture." He stared at me. "Read it off my furniture," figure of speech. He was quiet for 4 full seconds, which was for Seung-won essentially a confession. Then he said, carefully and quietly, in a voice stripped of its usual momentum, "There's something you should probably know about the pack, about a conversation that happened. Before you started the cart." He stopped. "I don't know if I'm the right person to tell you." The grill hissed between us. Somewhere down the street, a car horn blared and faded. I looked at Choi Seung-won, warm and worried and finally still, and felt the ground shift slightly under everything I thought I had already figured out. "Tell me," I said. The evening crowd moved around us like water around 2 stones, indifferent and continuous. And Seung-won looked at the grill for a moment with the expression of someone choosing between 2 directions and not loving either option. Then he pulled off the disposable gloves, folded them neatly in a way that was completely unlike him, and set them on the cart edge. "6 months ago," he said, "right? Before you told us you needed space, there was a pack meeting." He kept his voice low, not quite a whisper. The tone people use when they are saying something true that they wish were not. "You weren't there. You were never there for the formal ones, and I always thought that was just how you were, but—" He stopped. Kang-ho brought something to the table. A proposal. I kept my hands on the grill tools and my face completely neutral. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind where he suggested the pack consider whether the bond with you was." He paused on the next word long enough that I already knew what it was before he said it. "Permanent." The word landed with no drama. It did not need any. It was the kind of word that did its damage quietly, the way a clean cut takes a second before you feel it. I turned a row of skewers. The fat hissed and spat. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way I usually was not. "He suggested dissolving the bond," I said.
Not a question.
He framed it as a discussion about pack direction, about whether everyone was. Sunwoo's jaw tightened, lined. And what did the others say? He looked at me then, and what was on his face was not pity. I would have closed this conversation immediately for pity. It was something closer to fury that had been compressed over months into something quieter and more controlled. Ryunho didn't say anything at first, which is basically agreement from Ryunho when he disagrees and doesn't want to fight. Kang-ho had reasons: pack stability, social positioning, the fact that you had no career trajectory, no pack contribution, no clear. He said the next word like it tasted bad. Value. I almost laughed. I genuinely almost laughed. Not the sharp kind, the real kind. The kind that comes when something is so precisely wrong it crosses into absurd. No value. The heir to Choi Industries, standing over a charcoal grill in Mapo-gu, being assessed for pack value by a man who did not know what he was looking at. The comedy of it was extraordinary. I kept it off my face with some effort. And Genio, I said. Sungwon was quiet for a beat. Genio shut it down. Completely. He told Kang-ho the discussion was over, and that bond decisions were not made by committee, and that if anyone had a problem with the pack composition, they could raise it with him privately, and he would tell them the same thing privately. He exhaled. It didn't go to a vote. It didn't go anywhere. Gino closed it. I absorbed that, turned it over, set it next to the thing I had felt in the grain of Gino's entry table, the longing with my name on it, the weight of something carried a long time, and felt the two pieces connect with a quiet click of things that had always belonged together. Gino had felt that way about me and still shut Kang-ho down without hesitation, not because of what I was worth. Because of what I was to him, whatever complicated, locked-safe version of that he had not yet found a way to say out loud. Why didn't you tell me, I said. Because Genio asked us not to. He said it would hurt you without helping anything since it was already resolved. Sungwon's voice had an edge now, controlled but present. I disagreed. I've disagreed for 6 months, but I also. He stopped, pressed his mouth together. I didn't want to be the one who hurt you with it. I looked at him for a long moment. Choi Sunwon, the hummingbird, finally still, hands folded on the card edge and worry written plainly across every feature, and underneath the worry that deep, specific protectiveness that I now understood completely. He had been carrying this since before I even started the test. He had been circling me for 6 months with this thing in his chest, trying to figure out how close was close enough to help without making it worse. You're not hurting me, I said. You sure? Because you've got the face. What face? The one where everything is fine and absolutely nothing is fine and you're doing math about it. I considered denying this. Kang-ho, I said instead. Yeah, he's been managing me. The distance, the calendar invites, the pack business framing. That's been him. Sunwon nodded once, short and tight. Ryunho went along with it because Ryunho hates conflict more than he hates injustice, which is a flaw I have told him about directly. And Gino, he hesitated. Gino let it go longer than he should have. I think he thought if he gave Kang-ho enough time he'd come around on his own. He hasn't. Kang-ho, 28 years old, sharp jaw, expensive coat, shame about me sitting in his chest like settled sediment. I thought about him taking exact change this morning. The way he looked around to make sure no one was watching him eat at my cart. The particular texture of what I felt off his watch 3 weeks ago. Not cruelty, never outright cruelty. Just the slow, grinding diminishment of someone who had decided you did not measure up and was too well-mannered to say it directly. That was almost worse than cruelty. Cruelty was a decision. This was a conclusion. Thursday, I said, quietly and to myself as much as Sunwon. What's Thursday? I looked at him. At his open, worried face, the warmth that was not performance, the protectiveness that had been standing guard over a secret he hated keeping. And I made a decision that was not entirely strategic and not entirely emotional, but lived somewhere honest in between. Come to the cart Thursday morning, I said. Early, before the others. He studied me. Why? Because something is going to happen and I'd rather you hear it from me first. I handed him a fresh pair of gloves. Now stop interrogating me and help me with the dinner rush. You're on handoff duty. He took the gloves, put them on, bumped his shoulder against mine once, brief and deliberate, and said nothing else. He did not need to. Some things communicated cleaner without words, and this was one of them. The evening crowd thickened around us. The grill burned steady and even. I worked through the next hour with my hands and let my mind run clean and cold over everything Sungwon had just handed me, building Thursday into a shape that felt less like an ending and more like exactly what it was, a reckoning. For all of us. Public witnessed and long overdue. Public witnessed and long overdue. Sungwon stayed until the last customer of the evening rush, a tired-looking man who ordered 7 skewers and ate all of them standing at the cart without once looking up from his phone. and then helped me break everything down with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided to be useful and meant it completely. We worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have just said something real and do not need to fill the space after. He folded the cart cover with more precision than strictly necessary. I locked the grill and pocketed the keys and looked at the empty corner that would be full again tomorrow morning, ordinary and unremarkable to everyone who passed it. 4 days had become 3. I walked back to the apartment with Sungwon half a step beside me, close enough that our arms brushed occasionally on the narrow pavement. And he did not make it a thing, and neither did I. At the corner where our routes diverged, he stopped and looked at me with that direct, unguarded quality that was the best and most disarming thing about him. "Are you okay?" he said. "Define okay." "Functional, not spiraling. Not planning anything that's going to give me a stress ulcer." "I'm functional," I said. "The other two are pending." He pointed at me. "Thursday. I'll be there early." He said it like a promise and not a question, which was the correct way to say it, and then he turned and walked in the direction of his apartment building with his hands in his pockets, and his shoulders carrying slightly less than they had at the start of the evening. I watched him go and felt something in my chest settle by a fraction. Not relief exactly. More so like the specific solidity of knowing there was one person in your corner who had chosen to be there before it was advantageous. I went upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table. I did not sleep for a long time. Wednesday arrived the way days arrive when you are counting them, too fast and carrying too much. I was at the cart by 5:15, earlier than usual. The sky still fully dark and the street empty except for a convenience store worker restocking a sidewalk display and a cat sitting on a parked scooter with the lordly indifference of something that had never once doubted its own authority. I nodded at the cat. It did not nod back. Reasonable. I had the grill running by 5:30 and spent the first hour in the clean meditative rhythm of the work, threading and turning and managing heat, letting my mind do what it needed to do, which was primarily run through Thursday's sequence in enough detail that nothing surprised me when it happened. Attorney Wu had confirmed the board session would begin at 9. The public statement would go out by 2 in the afternoon. By 3, every major business outlet in Seoul would be running the story. By 4, anyone who had my phone number and also read financial news would be having a significant moment of personal reckoning. The question was what happened between 2 and 4 on Saturday evening at Gino's apartment. Kang-ho arrived at the cart at 7:18, not on a run, not passing through. He came directly in a structured charcoal coat, hands out of his pockets for once, and he looked like a man who had made a decision overnight and was carrying it in front of him carefully, the way you carry something that might break. He stopped at the cart and looked at me and did not perform anything. No casual register, no checking if anyone was watching. Just Kang-ho, 28, looking at me with something stripped back that I had not seen on him before. "Sunwoo," he said. "Kang-ho." I handed him a skewer on instinct. He took it and held it and did not eat it. That was new. "I need to say something." "Okay." He looked at the grill. "I haven't been fair to you." I kept my hands moving, slow and steady. "Go on." "The pack dynamic, the dinners, the way I've been." He stopped, jaw working. "It wasn't about you doing anything wrong. I want to be clear about that. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," I said simply. Something moved across his face, surprise, and then something more uncomfortable. The particular discomfort of a person who prepared an apology for someone they expected to be wounded and found them standing upright instead. I had concerns about pack stability, about where things were going long term. I handled those concerns in a way that was. Another stop, not right. I looked at him fully then, set the tongs down, and gave him the courtesy of my complete attention, because whatever else Kang-ho was, he was standing at a street food cart at 7 in the morning, delivering an uncomfortable truth without dressing it up. And that cost something. "What changed?" I said. "Sungwon told me he was going to tell you about the meeting." There it was. Not entirely unprompted then. But not entirely calculated either. The guilt in his face was real. It had the texture of something that had been building for a while and had finally found its exit. "So this is getting ahead of the conversation," I said. "Partly," he said, honest enough to admit it. "And partly because I've been watching you show up to this cart every morning for 6 months, and I kept waiting for you to fall apart or give up or prove the concern right, and you never did. You just." He gestured at the cart, the grill, the neat row of skewers. "Kept going. That's generally what I do. I know that now." He finally ate the skewer, one bite, and looked at me with something that was not quite absolution-seeking and not quite pride. Something in between that did not have a clean name. "I'm sorry, Sunwoo." Directly and without qualification. The morning light was doing its spring thing, gold and slightly hazy, catching the steam off the grill and turning it briefly luminous. I picked the tongs back up. I thought about Kang Ho's watch and the shame I felt through it, not malice. Just a man who had drawn a wrong conclusion and built a structure around it and was now standing in the rubble of it trying to hand me something genuine. I hear you, I said. Not I forgive you, because forgiveness was not a vending machine, and I was not going to dispense it on a Wednesday morning at a street cart. But I hear you, which was true and real, and left the door the specific amount of open that the moment deserved. He nodded once, said exact change on the cart edge, and then this time told me to keep it. Then his phone buzzed and he looked at it, and something shifted in his expression, fast and sharp. He turned the screen toward me without a word. It was a business news alert. Early release, the kind that leaked before the official statement. The headline was 4 words and my full legal name. Noh Sunwoo, Choi Industries, Heir. I looked at him, one day early. The clock, it turned out, had not waited for Thursday after all. Noh Sunwoo, Choi Industries, Heir. The word sat on Kang Ho's screen between us like something that had been waiting a long time to exist in the open air and had finally decided not to wait anymore. I looked at the headline for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked at Kang Ho, who was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, not in 6 months of careful observation, not once. It was the expression of a man watching the ground rearrange itself under his feet in real time and having no prepared response for it because no preparation would have helped. Sunwoo, he said. Just my name, nothing attached to it. The cart needs covering, I said. Help me with the left side. He stared at me. Did you hear what I said? Did you see what this, Kang Ho? I held out the cover edge, left side. He took it. We covered the cart together in silence. The same silence Sunwoo and I had worked in the night before, except this one had more. Electricity in it, the specific charge of a truth that had just broken the surface and had not yet finished rising. I locked the wheels. I pocketed the keys. I took off my apron for the second time in 2 days and folded it over the cart handle, and then I took out my own phone and called Attorney Woo. He picked up on the first ring. I was about to call you. There was a leak from inside the board. The statement is going out now, not Thursday. I'm sorry, Sunwoo. It moved faster than we planned. It's fine, I said. Send me the public version when it's live. I hung up. Kang Ho had not moved. He was still holding his phone with the screen dark now, standing on the Mapo-gu pavement in his charcoal coat, and he looked, for the first time in my entire experience of him, genuinely young. Uncertain in the way that had nothing to do with calculation and everything to do with a person realizing the shape of a mistake in its full size all at once. My phone started buzzing, then buzzing again, then in a pattern that meant multiple contacts hitting at the same time. I turned the screen over in my hand and watched the notification stack. Business contacts, my grandfather's office, 3 numbers I did not recognize, and then, cutting through all of it, a call from Seo Gino. I answered. Sunwoo. His voice was different, not the careful, controlled register I was used to. Stripped of it entirely. Tell me it's true. Which part? All of it. A breath. The air, the company, the cart. Another breath, shorter. Tell me you were there this whole time, and I just... He stopped. Something in the stop was ragged in a way that Gino's voice never was. Tell me. I looked down the street. The direction he had walked this morning with his hands in his pockets and his almost smile, and that laugh that had escaped before he meant to let it. Come to the cart, I said. Now all of you. I hung up. Kang Ho was still looking at me. I met his eyes and let him see whatever was on my face. Which was not triumph, I had checked. It was something more complicated and more honest than triumph. You should call Ryunho, I said. Tell him to come. Sungwon already knows, Kang Ho said quietly. Not an accusation. Just the pieces fitting together in real time. He does. Kang Ho nodded slowly. Then he made the call. They arrived within 12 minutes, which told me they had all been close. Which told me that whatever the pack had been doing this morning, it had been somewhere in this neighborhood, which meant Gino had brought them here. Towards me before the news broke. I filed that and felt it settled somewhere important. Gino arrived first, slightly ahead of the others, and he walked up to me with none of his usual measured pace, faster, direct, and he stopped closer than he normally stood, close enough that I could smell his scent clearly, for the first time without the buffer of social distance between us, cedar and something warmer underneath, and it hit my senses like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly and with complete seriousness, how long? 6 months. Something crossed his face, not anger, the other thing, the one I had felt in his entry table, the longing that had my name on it, and it was fully visible now, no compression, no packing it back behind the composure. I came to your cart this morning with nothing, he said. No reason, no excuse, just. He stopped, I know, I said. I've been, another stop. His jaw worked. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you something for a long time, and I kept thinking I needed the right moment, and there was never a right moment, and then you were at a street cart in Mapo every morning. And I kept coming up with reasons why today wasn't the day, and Jinyo, I'm in love with you. The words came out level and final, the way he said all significant things, flat and unbothered on the surface and carrying everything underneath. I have been for longer than is probably dignified to admit. And I shut down that meeting 6 months ago not as Pac Alpha. I shut it down because the idea of dissolving any bond with you made me want to burn the entire conversation to the ground. The morning was very quiet around us. Ryunho was standing 2 steps back with his hand over his mouth and his eyes doing something complicated. Seungwon was looking at the sky with the suspiciously casual expression of someone trying not to visibly cry. Kangho stood apart, hands at his sides, carrying the weight of what he owed and not flinching from it. I looked at Seo Jinyo, Pac Alpha, 29 years old, standing in front of a locked barbecue cart in Mapo-gu, having just said the truest thing he had probably ever said out loud. And I felt my psychometry go completely quiet the way it only did when the truth was already fully in the open, and there was nothing left to read. Beneath the surface, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around mine immediately, no hesitation. And what came through my gift was so clean and so singular and so entirely without hidden layers that it almost undid me. Just warmth, just him, just this. I know, I said for the second time, and this time it meant something different. He exhaled, slow and unsteady, and pressed his forehead down against mine, and I let him, and the city moved around us with its usual indifferent noise. And for one suspended moment, everything I had spent 6 months building toward arrived all at once. The clarity, the proof, the answer to the question my grandfather had sent me out to find. Then my phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. 4 words and an address. He knows who you are. I stared at the screen. Jingo felt my stillness and lifted his head. What is it? I looked up at him, at all 4 of them, my pack. Complicated and flawed and more real to me than anything I had found in the bottom of 6 months of careful, deliberate searching. Nothing, I said, and tucked the phone into my pocket and held Gino's hand a little tighter, because some clocks, once started, did not stop for anyone, and somewhere in Seoul, someone already knew exactly who I was and had not decided yet what to do about it. And just like that, Noh Sunwoo, the man who sold pork belly skewers on a Mapo street corner, the omega they called Directionless, the one they left off calendar invites and discussed dissolving like he was a minor inconvenience, stood in the morning light, holding the hand of the alpha who had loved him in silence for longer than either of them had admitted, surrounded by a pack that was only now beginning to understand exactly what they almost threw away. He had come looking for the truth. He found something bigger. Not just who was real and who was performing, but who, when the ground shifted, moved toward him instead of away. The billionaire heir was never the secret. The secret was that he already knew. Every touch, every skewer handed over a charcoal grill, every charged silence and careful glance, he had been reading them all along. And what he found, underneath all the uncertainty and the distance, and the one meeting that nearly ended everything before it began, was something his psychometry could not manufacture and his grandfather could not have planned for. Something that felt, against all his careful calculations, exactly like home. But that unknown number sat in his pocket like a lit match, and Seoul, beautiful and indifferent, never ran out of people with something to prove. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It genuinely means everything. If this story moved you, surprised you, or kept you up when you should have been sleeping, please subscribe. There are more stories just like this one waiting for you, and you do not want to miss what comes next.